This is the 1-3 skills practice. In the first part it says to evaluate each expression and name the property used in each step. And so it would be handy to have the vocabulary handout for section 1-3 because it explains all of the properties that we might be naming. So in number 1, we're going to use order of operations, and every time we do a calculation or a step, we're going to name what the reason that we're allowed to do that using one of the number properties. So we have, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Order of operations. So the first thing that we do is parentheses, and then within the parentheses we're going to do the exponent first. So 4 squared is 16. And when we take a number and replace it with what it is equal to, that's called the substitution property. And then from now on, I'm going to write that as subs. The next step, we still have parentheses, so we're going to do the division in there. 16 divided by 16 is 1. And once I just have a number, I can get rid of the parentheses. So, and then again, I'm replacing what 16 divided by 16 is, and that's substitution. And then the last step is 7 times 1, that's 7, and there's a property that says anything times 1 is itself. It's the multiplicative identity. So multiplicative identity. And from now on, I'm going to write that as mult ID. Alright, and number 2, we have 2 sets of parentheses, so within the square brackets we have to do what's in the parentheses first. 15 divided by 3 is 5. And what I've done is basically just substitute what 15 divided by 3 is, substitution property. 5 minus 5 is 0, and that's the additive inverse. And what that says is that if I take a number and add its opposite, so 5 plus a negative 5, that's the same thing as 5 minus 5 inverse. That's the same thing as minus 5. And that is always going to be 0. And from now on, I'm going to write that as add inverse. The next thing we do is 2 times 0, which is 0. And that's the multiplicative property of 0, which says that anything times 0 is 0. From now on, that's going to be mult prop 0. All right, number 3. Inside the brackets, we have parentheses, so we do 2 times 3 first. 2 times 3 is 6. We are substituting that in because they are equivalent. We can do that. And then we do 7 minus 6, since that's in the square brackets, which is 1. And again, we've substituted that in. Then comes multiplication before the subtraction, so 3 times 1 is 3, and that's the multiplicative identity. Anything times 1 is itself. And then the last one, 4 minus 3 is 1. And that's just a substitution property. Number 4, inside the brackets we have parentheses, so 4 times 2 comes first. So 4 times 2 is 8. That's just a substitution. Next, inside the brackets, 8 minus 8, that's the additive inverse, which gives us 0, because adding a negative 8 is the same thing as subtracting 8. So 8 minus 8 is the same as 8 plus its opposite, which is negative 8, which is 0. And that is the additive inverse. Then we have multiplication next. 4 times 0 is 0. That's the multiplicative property of 0 that we used in the problem above this one. Mult prop. And then 0 plus 1 is 1. And that's the additive identity. Anytime you end up with the same number back, it's going to be an identity problem. So in this one, when we add 0, we end up with that same number back. That's the additive identity. In number 1, when we multiplied by 1 and got the same number back, that was the multiplicative identity, because you were multiplying and got the same number instead of adding and getting the same number. All right, number 5. We do the round parentheses inside first. 2 plus 3 is 5. That'll be a substitution. And then 2 times 5 inside there comes next. That's another substitution. Finishing off the square brackets, we have 10 minus 10, which is 0. And that's the additive inverse property. And then 9 times 0 is 0 by the multiplicative property of 0. And then 6 plus 0 is 6, and that's the additive identity, because I got the number back after I added. And the last one on this page, inside the parentheses, division comes first. 6 divided by 3 is 2. That's a substitution. And then 2 minus 1 inside the parentheses is 1. That's another substitution. Two times 1 is 2 by the multiplicative identity. And then 2 written as a fraction is 2 over 1 times 1 over 2. Those are reciprocals, and when you multiply reciprocals, the answer is 1. And that's the multiplicative inverse property. The last couple problems are going to be dealing with the commutative and associative properties, which help us to do mental math more quickly. So we're going to be reordering them. The commutative property says that we can reorder them in any way if it's multiplication or addition, and it doesn't matter. And the associative property says we can group them in any way, and it doesn't matter. So when I look at number 7, I see a 6, and I'm hoping that somewhere down the road I see something that ends in a 4 because it'll end up adding to a nice even 10. So I'm going to put the 16 and the 14 next to each other. And then I'll also have the 8 and the 12 next to each other, and that's convenient because those will also add up to an even 10. And that's by the commutative property, which I'm going to write as COMM from now on. Then I would like to do the 16 plus 14 and the 8 plus 12 separately at the same step rather than going from left to right like the order of operations tell me to do. So I'm going to do 16 plus 14 in parentheses. And then in parentheses 8 plus 12. And that's the associative property that says I can do that, which I'm going to abbreviate ASSOC. Then I'm going to do it. 16 plus 14 is 30. 8 plus 12 is 20. And those are just substitutions. And then the last one, 30 plus 20 is 50. Remember, we're doing this mental math, so we should not have calculators to do it. The whole point is to be able to do it in your head quickly. All right, number 8. Again, if I see something that ends in a 6, I'm looking for something that ends in a 4, because those are going to end up being nice 10s. So I'm going to put 36 next to 14. And 23, I'm hoping has a 7 to go with it, and it does. And that's the commutative property again. Now I want to do the 36 plus 14 separate from the 23 plus 7. So I'm going to put them in parentheses. And that's the associative property that says I can do that. 36 plus 14 is 50. 23 plus 7 is 30. Those are substitutions. And 50 plus 30 is 80. Another substitution. All right. In number 9, when I have multiplication, what I'm hoping for is something that ends in a 0. When I multiply them, something will end in a 0. Well, 5 times 3 is 15. That doesn't end in a 0. But 5 times 4 is 20. That ends in a 0. So I'm going to put those two next to each other. And the commutative property says I can do that. I can reorder them. Then I want to do 5 times 4 separate from 3 times 3. So I'm going to put them in parentheses. And the associative property says I can do that. And then 5 times 4 is 20. 3 times 3 is 9. That's a substitution. And then 20 times 9, the trick is to take 2 times 9, which is 18. And then however many zeros I have after my 2 is how many I put after the 8. So I have 180 instead of 18. And then the next one, again, I'm looking for something that ends in a 0 when I multiply, so it'll be nice and easy. Ideally, it would be 10. 2 times 4 is 8, but 2 times 5 gives me 10. So I'm going to put the 2 and the 5 next to each other. And that's the commutative property. Then I want to do 2 times 5 separate from 4 times 3. So I'm going to put them in parentheses. 2 times 5 is 10. 4 times 3 is 12. That's a substitution. And then when I multiply something by 10, I just stick a 0 at the end of that something. So I have 12 with 1 0 after the end, 120, and that's another substitution.